The St. Louis Cardinals outfield has received a little bit of a makeover these past several days. Could more changes be on the way? Welcome into episode number 115 of the Lou Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Hannaford. He is Dylan Freebird Hampel, and we have an exciting episode planned for you all tonight in just a couple of minutes. Lynn Worthy of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch is going to be joining us to talk some Cards baseball, some of these recent outfield changes, as well as the implementing of a six-man rotation that is beginning this very week. Lots to be discussed. Dylan, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
I cannot complain. We are knee-deep in the NBA Finals as well as the Stanley Cup Finals, and we got the World Cup right around the corner coming up here in a couple of days. And, man, the Cardinals are hot. They just came off a great homestand, and they're 7 games over 500 as we record, pushing for 10 over hopefully in this road series. I'm looking forward to diving into the changes they made and seeing how it impacts the team moving forward as you just touched on.
And just briefly before Lynn joins us here to paint a picture for what the main topics are going to revolve around for this episode, Lars Nootbaar, certainly a very notable return back to St. Louis from the injured list. All of the issues he had been dealing with the Haglund's deformity, the recovery from surgery, his immediate impact, how it's been felt, as mentioned, Hunter Dobbins, his implementation into the six-man rotation. What did he do so well to get here, and what do things look like at some point when they move back to a five-man rotation? And then the Cardinals also reinstating Nathan Church from the injured list, and as a result, Victor Scott II being sent down to Triple-A because of the struggles he had been going through. What are things going to look like long-term? And when I say long-term, I mean specifically 2026, planning out 2026 for this outfield. A lot of questions to discuss. We're going to be sure to hit on all of them. On the other side, Lynn Worthy of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch joining us right here on the Lou Sports Talk podcast. Welcome back to the Lou Sports Talk podcast on STL Sports Central. Pleased to be joined by our guest tonight. Lynn Worthy is a sports columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and is also on X at LWorthy Sports. Second time joining the podcast, and a much more exciting time this year than around the time you were last year, just based on the overall direction that this Cardinals team is heading in. Lynn, appreciate the time tonight. I'll just start you with that. What a fun start to 2026 it's been for this Cardinals team.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the invite. It's interesting. I think I was actually in our newspaper office earlier today talking about how talking with somebody about how the record actually isn't all that different from a year ago, but the feeling around the team is, just in terms of whether it's the makeup of the roster or just the way fans seem to view the team, and it's actually kind of cool to see because, like I said, it's not that different, but just the way people have, so like the optimism and the way they're viewing this team seems to be different, and just the vibe, I mean, and again, that's the team, that's also fans, that's the tarps off, that's all that stuff.
You mentioned several of them right there, and there is, I think, even in the last week or so, further reason that fans are continuing to get excited, and you look at the disparity in this lineup that we've seen through a large chunk of the year. 1 through 4 have carried heavily, 5 through 9 have struggled. But with the return of Lars Nootbaar, with Jimmy Crooks getting recalled, all of a sudden the lineup is beginning to look a little bit deeper. And that's where we're going to start things, is with the addition, the return of Lars Nootbaar to this lineup. We know that 2025 was a struggle for Noot, but prior to that, there was not really much question in what Lars Nootbaar was as far as his caliber of at-bat that he was going to be able to provide on a night-in, night-out basis. So trying to find the balance between what we saw in 23-24 with Lars Nootbaar as well as 2025, what is a realistic expectation for how Lars Nootbaar can contribute offensively this season?
I think up until last season, the question mark was just him staying healthy. And then last year, obviously, the numbers dropped. after the fact, we find out that there was clearly an injury issue, or at least an ailment with the heel situation. So to me, I mean, I've always, for whatever reason, I know the comparison that I had heard before, where people thought, the upside was of a Yelich. To me, for some reason, I sort of settled on, like, I thought if he was somewhere in that neighborhood of like Brandon Nimmo, Kyle Tucker, somewhere in between there is what I thought that he could be, in terms of, he got that plate discipline, he's got pop, he's got the ability to hit, and he also the ability to, draw walks and have that on base. I felt like, as long as he didn't sell out for one or the other, he could have that nice balance and be a really productive, left-handed bat. And I think he could still be that. And I think, it's not going to be, even with this young group, it's not as though they're putting a whole lot of pressure on him to have to be the engine for this offense. He just now gets to lengthen the offense. Because like you said, for a good chunk of this season, it was the top four spots, and then after that, it was a little shaky. Yeah. It's particularly those last couple of spots. And now I think what you're looking at least in terms of the quality of the at-bats you're going to get, especially since it seems like Mason Wynn's had some better at-bats now, driving the ball up the middle, line drives, that now you're down to maybe like three spots that you're sort of doing some mix and matching with. And those three spots are now you're going to be plugging in some combination of, Crooks, Velasquez, Church. So it's not that they're all going to be world beaters, but you feel like you can mix and match, whether that's Fermin coming in for at bats, or you can get the matchups that you're looking for, at least give yourself a good shot at those. And then you have the six spots with that, Weatherholt, Herrera, Walker, Burleson, you add Nootbaar, and Wynn, who you feel like you at least know what you're going to get as far as the consistency of the at-bat. So then you have those last three where, depending on the matchup with the starter, plus the, as the game goes along with the relievers, you can find yourself pretty good matchups to be able to compete and feel like you at least have solid at-bats up and down.
So we saw the Cardinals kind of ease Nootbaar back in, at least that first game, coming off the bench. And you mentioned they have Nathan Church coming back now, and you mentioned Velasquez. You also have Brian Torres still on this roster. I'm wondering how much are you expecting Lars Nootbaar to play now that he's back with the team healthy?
To me, I think he's going to be, or at least he will eventually be, pretty much an everyday player. I think, like they had him start a game, then come off the bench, and then start another game. So I think because he had like an abbreviated spring training, basically, with his rehab outing, that, they'll ease him into every day. But I think he's going to, at least that my expectation would be every day pretty much in that left field spot. And at this point, you basically have an everyday outfield because you'll have Nootbaar on left, you can have Church in center, Jordan Walker on right. So I feel like, and I'm sure they'll give him days off, and, depending on, again, he's coming off of surgery, so maybe they give him a couple extra days off. But I think for the most part, I see him as an everyday left fielder for them. And then maybe, they might give him a day where he DHs. I think I think if we go back to this first weekend series, it was starting, came off the bench, and then I think he DH'd one. So they may do some combination of that.
Maybe no one has played a more valuable role on the pitching side the past week and a half than Hunter Dobbins after the two appearances that combined for 8 2/3 scoreless innings against the Cubs and the Reds. Dobbins is now going to get the opportunity to start as they implement a 6-man rotation throughout the majority of the month of June. Before we get into that part specifically, I want to ask you, we saw Hunter Dobbins for a brief start earlier in the season. It was okay until it wasn't. It almost seems like, to a certain extent, a new and improved Hunter Dobbins as far as just the quality of stuff that we've seen in these two relief appearances. From your perspective, what has allowed for him to be so effective in these couple of appearances?
And I think back to that first one, and I know he started off Triple-A, and I don't think I've actually. Well, I know I haven't asked, but it occurs to me after the fact is just how much of that first part of the year was just him still getting healthy, because he had missed a big chunk of last season, and obviously with the surgery and even spring training, there was he was more or less a full participant in spring training, but there were some things they kept him from doing until he had full clearance, to even just field and things like that. And just with that much time off, even if you have an off season where you're rehabbing and you're still trying to, I feel like the first part of the season might have still been him getting back into things and the new organization and everything. Not to make excuses or anything, but I wonder if some of that played into it. But he's looked solid in those outings, out of the bullpen in long relief, basically piggyback starts more or less. And I think he's just been, when he's on the attack, it seems like he's, when he comes after guys, he's had some walks, but when he comes after guys and he's been able to pitch out of, some situations. So I think he's got, it's not a over the top swing and miss stuff, but it seems like he's been able to get out of situations where he's needed to. I'm interested to see how he looks in a full starting role. I mean, I think I compare him this season to, what we saw last year with McGreevy, where he would come in and have a spot start and then have a long relief outing. And it would seem like he was basically on deck to be the next starter when, if they made a move or if there was something at the trade deadline. And I look at Dobbins the same way, as if, if they decide they're going to do something with like a Dustin May at the trade deadline, then the guy who's already primed and ready to step in, who's already had some starts, who's already had some outings, who's been with the big league club at different times, is Dobbins. Just like, McGreevy was last year. And then also, the last 3 years, I think it's been that they've used that 6-man rotation at different points because, for multiple reasons. A couple years ago, you had some older guys in that rotation that needed a little bit of extra rest. When you had think back to the Gibson, Lynn, Gray rotation, and you lengthen that out. Plus, you had Andre Palante, who was converting to a full-time starter. Last year, you had Matthew Liberatore converting to a full-time starter. And so those 6-man stretches sort of helps you lengthen things out for those guys. And this year, again, Kyle Leahy converting to a full-time starter, and Dustin May, who's obviously coming off of one of his biggest years as far as innings, still has had a lot of injuries, hasn't had a lot of workload in the past couple of years. The 6-man rotation lengthens things out for him and for Leahy. So it just makes feel like it's, it works multiple ways in terms of getting him ready for maybe later in the season, but also giving that rotation what it needs right now.
Cardinals are in a long stretch of games right now. I think it's June 29th between now and then. They only have one scheduled day off in that time. Do you expect the team to only utilize the 6-man rotation from now until then, or do you think we could see this extend, even beyond that?
I think it's going to be tough to extend beyond that just because you're going to be a little short in the bullpen. And I think that's also part of, playing into the lead up to this because, okay, you're going to be able to use the 6-man rotation right now. You had an off day, and then also Dobbins, by pitching in relief and you're not having to use much bullpen, you're able to at least give those guys some extra rest going into this long stretch when you're going to be short a reliever, basically. But I don't know if you can do that over an extended period of time without really worrying about wearing down your pen. And I think at some point he probably goes back down. It's again, using the reference point of McGreevy last year, like he had stretches where he was here, but then went back down and continued starting on a regular rotation. And then they bolstered the bullpen. So I don't know for sure. I haven't been told or anything like that, but I'm just assuming there's going to be more of that format because to be able to go that way in the bullpen. I mean, you can get away with it for a while, and obviously Gordon Gracevero can give you multiple innings, and you have some guys who can step in. It just seems like it's a stretch to do that for too long of a period.
I'm very intrigued by how exactly, once they do move back to a 5-man, assuming that they do, what the rotation is going to look like. I would lean your way that it's going to we're most likely to see Dobbins continue to stick in that role of kind of the McGreevy of last year. But I do think that there is a way in which Hunter Dobbins can force his way into this rotation if he performs well enough. But then all of a sudden you have a very difficult conversation of who falls out of it, because there up to this point there hasn't really been anyone that I would argue has pitched poorly enough to say that they should be booted out of the rotation at this point. So that's kind of where my question comes from here, Lynn, is that if he pitches well enough to You have no other choice than to put him in. How do you begin to navigate this if you're Oliver Marmol? Is it solely performance based? What direction do you head in if he pitches so well that he just has to be in the rotation?
To me, I don't. Well, I mean, barring an injury, which sort of makes it easy, I don't know if there's really a scenario where I think he forces his way in, because I feel like the spot that would come to mind would probably be Leahy, but they have said from the beginning that they were going to commit to him the way they did to Libby last year. And so that means letting him ride out the ups and the downs, and it means, for him to be a starter and to get into that routine. When last year, I'm trying to remember, I think it was less than 70 innings or something, or maybe in that neighborhood, to go to be a starter the next season. They have to let him work through the ups and downs, work through the growing pains, work through, I think it was his last outing or the outing before that, where in the post game, all his terminology was, they were going to pick their spots to decide when to try and let him push through that, sort of threshold of 5 innings or so. So obviously they're dealing with, workload and trying to lengthen them out and working through lineups multiple times. That's all stuff that they're working through. But when you committed to him in spring training and coming out of spring training, or, even this offseason, and said he's going to be a starter, that was part of what you're committing to. So I don't know that you can pull the rug out from under him now. I guess there's a scenario where maybe they change their mind, but I don't think so, because I think they need the pitching. They don't have the pitching depth, the starting pitching depth, to be able to just give up on guys, midway into the season. And I think, as you get close to the trade deadline, assuming guys are healthy, then and with May, more or less being a free agent, there's the mutual option. It seems like a cut and dry trade candidate where it's, if he draws some attention and you make the deal, then you have somebody to slot right in.
As we mentioned, the most recent move the club made was to reinstate Nathan Church from the IL, and in turn, the corresponding move was sending Victor Scott back to Triple-A Memphis. So we know that Scott has the athletic ability. We've seen, he was a Gold Glove finalist last year in center field, and he's consistently one of the fastest guys in the league. But, we've seen encouraging stretches here and there from the offensive side of the ball from Victor Scott, but haven't really seen him put it all together yet as a hitter here at the major league level. Once he's back up with the team, what does Victor Scott need to do to prove he has truly found something?
Well, I feel like he's going to need to at least show, or at least give them an idea that he's changed things before they bring him back up. I don't think they're going to bring him back up just to see. I think he's going to have to earn his way back up by showing them that he's a more consistent hitter. I don't know if it's going to be a completely different hitter, but a more consistent hitter than what he's shown thus far. Because right now you've got, another option in Church, who can play a good defensive center field and who's giving them more offensively than he has. The things you already mentioned, the defense is obviously top caliber, the speed is, but he's not getting on base enough to make that speed an impact on or enough of an impact on games. So do that, then it doesn't completely wipe out the element that you get from the speed, but it's not enough to make it impactful. Then it almost wipes it out. So I think they're going to have to see him be a more consistent hitter, and then have at least a way to get out of some of the stretches. Like, you can't have long stretches like that where you're not productive. Everybody's going to have slumps, but you have to shorten those to where it's not elongated, extended stretches. If he can show that he can do that, being able to handle different types of pitching, because obviously with the breaking stuff, the spin has given him trouble at times, and you can't go into the big leagues and they know that there's one way to pitch you and consistently get you out. That's not gonna fly. And so he's got to be able to show those things for them to be able to bring him back and then see how it fits.
Final question here before we wrap, and it is involving Victor Scott once again, who now is going to have some competition in center field in Triple-A. Joshua Báez has been getting a lot of starts down there in these past several weeks, and he has been completely demolishing Triple-A pitching. there's a lot of people already calling for Báez to be with the big league club. And regardless of where you fall on that, I think most people would agree that a call-up is probably not that far away. I think a lot of people would say it's probably coming at some point this season. So with that being said, how small of a window of opportunity is there right now for Victor Scott to be able to get back to the majors and potentially be that everyday starter for the St. Louis Cardinals? It feels like, to me, Lynn, that window is beginning to close, where the outfield is going to be plenty of room for opportunity to be able to struggle as immensely as, for example, Walker did these past couple of years. Nolan Gorman has at times in the majors. Victor Scott these last couple of years. Feels like that window might be closing a little bit. What are your thoughts?
I mean, if it's closing, I'm not sure if it is as much Báez, just because I'm not totally sold yet that in the big leagues he's going to be the center fielder. I mean, obviously they play guys at spots in the minors to give them the experience, get them, so they're exposed to it, to give it a look. But I think especially with the pitching staff that relies on the defense so much, I'm just not sure. And I haven't seen him close up playing center field, so I can't say. But I mean, when you have a couple of guys who are elite caliber center fielders to go offensive, and especially with a rookie, or whenever he would come up, he would be a rookie. I don't know if that's the answer, but I think for Vic, it's going to come down to, he's just got to be, I mean, whether it's here or not. I mean, I remember, I used to hear it all the time when I covered minor league ball was, you'd have a guy who looked like he was a top prospect and be blocked by somebody. And the phrase always was, well, you don't just play for the organization that you're in, you play for the other 29 organizations, because, by performing, that's how you get yourself somewhere. So, I mean, from Vic's standpoint, he's got to perform no matter what. And if that means getting another shot up in the big leagues here, it does. If not, then maybe that opens up a door somewhere else. I don't think the door is closed yet, just because, of his elite defense, his speed. And with Nathan Church, I mean, obviously he's shown some flashes, but he's also a guy who he swings pretty freely, and if that turns into strikeouts, if that turns into unproductive at bats, then maybe that opens the door again. If there's always, it's a long baseball season, no team stays healthy the entire time, so it's a matter of, are you in a position that when something happens, you're the name that they check off to bring up. So I don't think the door is closed yet. I'm still not sure if Báez is the answer there. And I still think that, for me, I'm always more towards give the guy more time in the minors than less. Let him dominate and stay there longer than rushing him. But sure. So I don't think it's done for Vic yet. I think he's got to make those improvements.
A lot of thoughts, a lot of takeaways. It's a fun time to be covering Cardinals baseball. And Lynn, we appreciate you taking time out of your evening to discuss some of these things, and look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks for having me.
He is Lynn Worthy with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, covering the St. Louis Cardinals as well as the Blues and other teams as well. Follow him on X at @LWorthy Sports. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, some more of our own discussion regarding Joshua Báez. What does the near future look like for him? Is the window closing for Victor Scott II? It's all coming up right here on the Lou Sports Talk podcast. Welcome back to the Lou Sports Talk podcast on STL Sports Central. Man, a huge thank you to Lynn Worthy from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for joining us tonight. He puts out some awesome content for STL today, so be sure to go and follow him on X at @LWorthy Sports. Great follow, great content. Thank you to Lynn Worthy for joining us. And I thought that he brought up some interesting points in our conversation with him, and at least the one that came to mind the most, and maybe he surprised me a little bit, takes us into our first topic, and that is Lars Nootbaar, Dylan, who returned from the injured list, the 60-day IL, on Friday night after the recovery from the Haglund's deformity surgery that he had last October. Took him all this time to be able to be on his feet enough be doing activities fully enough to be able to be playing baseball. He's back now, and it took Nootbaar absolutely no time to have his impact felt once returning from the injured list on Friday. A crucial RBI double off of the wall to give St. Louis a big insurance run at the time. It also started the scoring in a 6-run inning on Saturday. He had the go-ahead 2-run blast in the 8th inning that would end up, like I said, go ahead and help the Cardinals get that win. Overall, went 3 for 10 with 2 runs, a home run, 3 runs driven in, 3 walks, and 3 strikeouts as well over the weekend series against the Cincinnati Reds. So exciting to see him back. I think the part that surprised me most is that Worthy thinks that eventually he is going to be a guy that's going to be playing every day. I like to think they're going to probably play this a little bit more conservatively with him, but I'd like to know your thoughts on, first off, what we saw from Lars Nootbaar. We'll get into how he adds to this lineup, but let's start with how we think the Cardinals are going to utilize him and what his usage will be.
It was great seeing Nootbaar back on the diamond in a Cardinals uniform. It's crazy to think that it was close to a calendar year since we had seen him. And I mean, he's a fan favorite for a reason. He brought the energy right away. And I mean, it was bizarre at times earlier on in this season. I almost kind of forgot about him, where coming into the year, we were talking about what a huge piece he could be of being the longest tenured Cardinal and being a new leader in the locker room or in the clubhouse, excuse me. And then it was like, they didn't miss a step. The culture was set just fine. And it's awesome just to have him added into the fold, all the more so because, you know, that's what he does and has done throughout his entire career. So great seeing him come back, great seeing him do well. And yeah, I thought it was interesting that Lynn Worthy, that I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as him. I don't know if he'll be the everyday starting left fielder, but I think, as we've kind of already seen, they'll try to at least keep his bat in the lineup because, as we've talked about ad nauseum, this is a very top-heavy roster when it comes to the offensive side. And so I think they could really use him, you know, slotting in well as a 5-hole hitter, solid 5-hole hitter. It's somewhere they've been lacking all year because of Gorman's underperformance. So at least for me, I think what we've seen in the early going so far is on days when Herrera catches, you can put Nootbaar as the designated hitter and put Jimmy Crooks on the bench. But, you know, then how does that impact his development and his runway and yada, yada. But at least for me, I would be okay with having Nootbaar be your left fielder for the foreseeable future in that time, at least going up to the trade deadline. But I understand where you're coming from of wanting to be cautious because worst case scenario is he gets injured early on and has no potential trade value at the deadline if that is a piece you want to move on from. So I at least like keeping his bat in the lineup every day, but I don't think he should necessarily be the everyday left fielder.
And you're catching on with the point that I am making, that if Lars Nootbaar comes out and is hitting as well as I think he has the ability to do, then this is a guy that you want to keep healthy. He has no value if he's injured to you, something that has occurred too often, unfortunately, during his major league career. I think the Cardinals are going to be careful with the handling of him up until the trade deadline, making sure that he is an asset that can be negotiated as we near the end of July, the start of August. Because if he's injured, then he serves you no benefit. His bat certainly does play. I think it does play. I think we are going to see a version of Lars Nootbaar closer to the last couple of years than 2025. We'll get into that here in a second. But I think that another thing that benefits them in this situation that they're in right now is having a guy like Nelson Velasquez that pretty much is limited to solely being a left fielder or a designated hitter. I think that they're going to be able to use him against left-handed pitching. Lars Nootbaar came off of the bench when he hit that go-ahead 2-run home run. It was his second at-bat into the game, and he actually played center field late in the game due to some defensive substitutions. It'll be interesting to see how much they're willing to put him in center field. I have to imagine it's going to be very little and probably limited to only late-game defensive substitution situations. But if you have a guy like Nelson Velasquez that has been hitting really well against left-handed pitching in his small sample size, then maybe they can continue to use Nootbaar in that situation. The designated hitter spot certainly is unique because you do have Ivan Herrera that owns that spot 3 times through the rotation, probably ends up being more like 4 or 5 times. They're playing 6, 7 times in a week. If he's not there, maybe then that becomes an option on the occasion. I know they've been using Nolan Gorman a lot in that spot as well. They don't have a boatload of options right now at third base. I know you can mix Fermin in there a little bit, but this is kind of the season for Nolan Gorman to be really getting the reps at third base, even though it's going extremely poorly right now. That's kind of the way in which they've utilized it. It'll be interesting to see if it changes. You also have Jimmy Crooks, as you mentioned, that is, at least right now, they've still kept Báez in the mix a little bit. So if, let's say that Crooks is catching 2 of every 5 times through the rotation, do you want to try and squeeze him in the DH spot another time through the rotation? I would think so, but we haven't seen them do that yet. So the DH spot is just so jam-packed. It's going to be interesting to see if they try to fit another guy in Lars Nootbaar to get at-bats in that spot. I don't know how well I see it playing out to where Lars Nootbaar is going to be playing 6 times a week because they want to be careful with him. Mixed with, I think that there are mixtures of this lineup, and on top of them wanting to get enough guys reps and ABs, I think that they might have a hard time playing him consistently in a spot, notably the DH spot, anywhere besides really left field. It's going to be interesting to see how exactly they go about it. And we kind of are doing this backwards, but I want to talk a little bit more about which Lars Nootbaar we could get this year. And I think, Dylan, that it's important to bring up the Lars Nootbaar of 2023 and 2024. We know that 2025 was really rough for him, and it didn't come out until the end of the year. Just, I think, the exact reasoning as to why he was struggling so much. But if you look at the numbers for 2025, a 234 batting average, a 686 on base, or excuse me, a 686 OPS, 13 home runs and 48 runs driven in, double the amount of strikeouts compared to walks. It just wasn't a Lars Nootbaar that we are used to seeing at the major league level. And I think a lot of people got bad tastes in their mouth for Lars Nootbaar, when in reality, you look at what he did in 23 and 24, he was a lot more valuable than that, Dylan.
Yeah, I think you can kind of excuse some of the decrease in offensive output knowing he was trying to play through injury last year. I mean, he played a career high 135 games last year, but it was, as you said, playing part, trying to stay on the field as much as he could, and his production suffered as a result. So, I mean, he still had relatively consistent totals compared to years previous. He still hit 13 home runs and had 48 RBIs in 2025. But as you mentioned, it was his batting average and his OPS that really took a dip. And this was the first time in his career that his OPS plus was below league average, which is 100. He had an OPS plus of 95 last year compared to 113 and 114 in 2024 and 2023. So all those numbers to say that, yes, it was a down year offensively as he was playing through injury, but I mean, he still has, good savant numbers. I'd like to bring those up. I know you can take them with a grain of salt, but and Baseball Savant will tell you Lars Nootbaar is the second coming of Babe Ruth, but he still has a really good hard hit rate and a really good chase rate, which he's had throughout his whole career, and he had those things last year as well. So hopefully, with a fully healthy version of Lars Nootbaar, we can still see those translate to this season, and it will lead to increased OPS plus, OPS slugging, everything, batting average that we had just touched on.
This is a guy that you mentioned the Baseball Savant numbers, but I think that they are important to bring up when you look at how impactful he was when on the field in 2023 and 2024. This is a guy that was in the top 17% of baseball in xWOBA. He was in the top 30% of expected batting average, expected slugging, has consistently had strong exit velocities, hard hit rate in 2024 was in the 91st percentile of Major League Baseball. And we know that when he's at his best, he is extremely aware of the strike zone and what is a ball and what is a strike. And I think that he's probably a guy that once he gets a little bit more footing is going to really be able to take advantage of the ABS because of his knowledge of the strike zone. Even in 2025, when his numbers were at a career low, this is a guy that was in the top 13% of baseball in chase rate. Prior the year before in 2024, he was in the 100th percentile of chase rate. Very good discipline at the plate. The whiff rate was also very good. The walk rate in 2024, 98th percentile. 2023, 95th percentile. 2022, 98th percentile. Last year dropped off to the 80th percentile. So this is a guy that when he is at his best, when he's not pressing, when there's not an injury that is causing him to change the way in which he is approaching at bats, is a very hyper-vigilant guy at the plate. He knows what he's going up there looking for. He knows the pitches that he wants to swing at. He knows what he's going to lay off of. And I think that getting that guy back is going to benefit the Cardinals, especially you put him in that 5 spot. You look at a guy like him and maybe you're thinking that at his best he fits a little bit better for the top of the lineup than he does for a 5 or a 6 spot. But he's also a guy that, like we said, has really good contact rates as well. He's going to be able to drive some of those guys in the 3, the 4 spots in the lineup as well. So, I think you're talking more so about him being able to drive those guys in than you are for setting up the bottom of the lineup. But it does make it a little bit deeper. It's another guy to be able to help out the top of the lineup. And hopefully Jimmy Crooks, the more time he's here, he's going to continue to adjust, get more comfortable. I already mentioned Mason Wynn's been hitting better. The lineup gets a lot deeper all of a sudden when you add a couple of those bats and then Wynn's hitting better. So let's hope that collectively the lineup 1 through 9 is able to contribute a little more wholly. You're always going to have ebbs and flows, and you're always going to have more production from 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 in your lineup. But with how heavy the splits were between the two the past couple of months, you can only sustain that so long. And we saw it when all of a sudden 1 through 4 cools off, you have no run production. And that's what happened for the Cardinals when they started to skid a little bit there in the past few weeks. Now they're getting a little bit more from the entirety of the lineup. And this lineup looks a lot more appealing all of a sudden. So let's hope that we get a version of Lars Nootbaar closer to 2023, 2024 than we did in 2025. If you're able to keep that version of Lars Nootbaar healthy for the remainder of the year, or at least until the trade deadline, either way, it's going to help you. Whether it be if they get to that point, it would surprise me still. But if they are making a run for October, or if you're talking about trading him, you're only heightening his value. So it feels like if you can keep Lars Nootbaar on the field, it's a win-win for me. It's going to be interesting to see how exactly things go from here.
What a bar there! I don't know if you tried to rhyme on purpose, but that was glorious. The
Totally did.
What
did I
takeaway?
say?
I don't even remember. It was here and something else. Here,
all right, whatever.
It was so beautiful.
I'm clearly listening to what I'm saying.
Right. The take home lesson here, kids, is eat your carrots. Lars Nootbaar. I don't know if he's eating carrots, but good vision will take you far places in life. So I think that another, we've talked about the corner outfield shifting now with Nootbaar's return, and the other big move that the Cardinals recently made, as we touched on with Lynn Worthy when he was on, was sending Victor Scott down to Triple-A and activating Nathan Church. So I think it's high time we discuss the future of old Mr. Scott. We kind of talked about it, asked Lynn about it there at the end, but man, you saw the writing on the wall. You saw that we talked about this a couple episodes ago on the potential of Victor Scott being sent down, and hey, now they've pulled the trigger. So let's dive into it. What are your thoughts on this move occurring, Ethan, and what it means for the rest of the season?
It's not much of a secret that Victor Scott was having an absolutely abysmal 2026. This is a guy that last year we know that the biggest improvement he needed to make was he needed to find ways to get on base more. Well, 2026 has been even worse than 2025 was. A 194 batting average, a 276 on base percentage. That's the one that's the most alarming to me. The OPS is what it is. This isn't a guy that's going to hit for a load of power, but it doesn't matter. You can't have anyone in a lineup and expect to be impactful have a OPS below 550, and that's what he had. If you date back to when we're recording right now, the amount of stolen bases that he had last year compared to this year, the number is almost double from last year compared to what he has this year. He had 17 as we're recording right now on June 9th, and he's at 9 this year. And it's because he's not getting on base enough. I mentioned the 276 OPS, the WRC plus, weighted runs created plus, league average is 100. He's at 56. He is 44% below league average. And like I said, that Victor Scott II could be so much more because of his speed, because of his athletic abilities, but he has to be able to get on base, and he hasn't been able to do that enough. And I think that to a certain extent, his inability to get on base was affecting other parts of his game. He's been caught stealing already more times this year than he had in all of 2025. His fielding value has dipped off a little bit, specifically with his range. His outs above average. His arm strength is around the same. His arm value, according to Baseball Savant, has actually gotten a little bit better, but he hasn't been the same Gold Glove caliber center fielder that we saw in 2025. And I think there's a good reason for that is probably because he's pressing a lot at the plate right now. He's focusing so much on trying to be a better hitter, which he should be, that it's impacting other parts of his game. So I think that Victor Scott can still be an impactful piece of this Cardinals roster, but it wasn't going to be with the way in which things were looking for the entirety of 2026, really. I know that some of the on-base numbers the past couple of weeks have been a little bit better. The Cardinals clearly weren't sold enough on what they'd seen the last couple of weeks that either it was sustainable or that even that was enough for them to see. So he's going to really have to prove himself in Triple-A and improve on some things. One of the biggest things that he's going to need to improve on is he's going to have to learn how to hit off-speed pitching, because he has really struggled against anything besides the fastball this year. He has been good enough when it comes to hitting fastballs. 256 batting average, an expected batting average of 240. I don't expect this guy to be hitting for power in any way whatsoever, so I could care less what his slug or expected slug is against any pitch. I just need him to get on base, and I can live with a 240 expected batting average. What I can't live with is a 135 batting average against breaking pitches and a 059 batting average against off-speed pitches. Now, the expected numbers are a little bit higher than that for those, but still, it's unfortunately just not good enough. And he wasn't great against either of those pitches last year. Either of those types of pitches last year, but he's been even worse this year. So he has to be able to fix this approach and be able to hit off speed a little bit better, or at least fight off enough of it to see fastballs. And he hasn't been able to do that in 2025. So he's going to have a lot to work on. And it's going to be interesting to see how exactly things look regarding opportunity at the major league level eventually, regarding Joshua Báez not being that far away, in my personal opinion, and hitting the way that he has in Triple-A, Dylan.
When you hit a combined below 100, the average of a .097, as you mentioned, on anything other than a fastball, that is not a recipe for success at the big league level. A guy that reminds me of, that Victor Scott reminds me of in terms of play style, or the potential ceiling when I look back, is a guy like Harrison Bader. And I know Victor Scott has more so of a speed tool than Bader did, but that was who Harrison Bader came up as, was a plus defensive center fielder, ended up winning a Gold Glove for you, and who had great speed. And so Bader's problem in his time here and really throughout the big leagues is just not really being able to get on base enough to utilize that speed. And so I looked at some of the numbers, and I mean, throughout his five and a half, if you want to call it, seasons as a Cardinal, Harrison Bader averaged around a 320, 330 on base percentage. Victor Scott currently, his career on base percentage is a 281. So, and for reference, last season on base percentage was 305. This season so far, 276. So it's 50 plus points, below what Harrison Bader's was. So not being able to utilize the speed. I mean, it's surprising that he was able to steal 34 bases last year. Bader never stole more than 15 in a season in a Cardinals uniform. But I was just going to show that you can only hold on to, the carrot of potential for so long, and the Cardinals are showing that in making this move. So hopefully he can figure it out. I mean, we had him on earlier before the season, and he's a great guy, and I really do hope the best for him.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. Do you think that we live in a world where Victor Scott is, 2026 or beyond? Do you think he's going to be a starting center fielder for the Cardinals again, or you think that time is kind of past us?
I don't think it's fair to completely write it off, but I will say that I think that the odds certainly get a lot more difficult. I do agree with Lynn Worthy that in order for him to get back up here, he's going to have to prove that he can hit. And that might take a little bit of time. Now, I don't know how much time is going to occur between now and whenever Joshua Báez does get the call up. I would assume it happens at some point in 2026. And just for those that are not aware, if you're just beginning to hear the name Joshua Báez at this point for following the Cardinals, you might be a little bit under a rock to be just now hearing it, but that's okay if you are. We're here to explain. He is the Cardinals' third overall ranked prospect and is overall in Major League Baseball the 65th ranked prospect according to the MLB pipeline. Now, certain prospect rankings will have them higher than that. Some might have him lower, but most of them probably have him higher than 65th overall, and has been mashing Triple-A pitching. I mean, his numbers on the year, he just hit his 18th home run on Tuesday night. 276 batting average coming into Tuesday night, an OPS of 936. The biggest problem up to this point has been his strikeout numbers, and I have to imagine that's probably what the Cardinals want to see. Bernie Miklasz put out a great informational tweet a couple of hours from when we recorded, sharing some of the areas that he still does need to improve upon. He is currently in the second percentile in whiff swing rate, so he is still chasing a lot of pitches. He's in the fifth percentile in strikeout rate, even though it has dropped to 32%. It still has a little ways to go, and his zone contact percentage is still pretty low. It's actually the lowest of all those percentiles. It's in the bottom 1% of minor league baseball at 73.6%. So these are season long numbers. Some of these have been improving in recent days and weeks. I bring all this up to say that Joshua Báez still does have some work to be doing, but he is mashing Triple-A pitching right now and is on an absolute tear. And if some of these strikeout numbers continue to improve, Dylan, then it wouldn't surprise me if we're seeing a guy like Joshua Báez up by the trade deadline or around trade deadline time when, we're potentially trading away Lars Nootbaar. Now, there isn't a guarantee that happens. If that doesn't happen, then there's going to be another conversation that is going to have to happen regarding Joshua Báez and what it looks like to get to the major league roster. But Joshua Báez being there makes it that much more difficult for Victor Scott II. Nootbaar, whether he or not he's here, tweaks the conversation a little bit, but I do think that we are starting to phase out of a time where, at least for Victor Scott II, he's going to be able to go through those long stretches of intense struggle like he has, like I mentioned earlier, Jordan Walker did, Nolan Gorman has. And that's not to say that Joshua Báez can't, but Joshua Báez and his style of play it profiles in a little bit more of an appealing manner than Victor Scott II's does. That isn't to say that Scott doesn't fit a specific category that isn't going to benefit the Cardinals or a team, in that he is very good defensively and he has a lot of speed. So if he can get on base, then he's going to be able to manufacture runs in a different way. But Joshua Báez and his power is something to be reckoned with. And he's probably going to be a guy that is going to be in a Cardinal uniform for the next couple of years as a starting outfielder, whether it's in center field or in left field. I have to imagine it's probably more likely that he's in left field. But at some point, you're going to see him, and him being there automatically makes it feel like the runway for Victor Scott II feel a little bit shorter. I don't want to say that his chances are gone, because I genuinely don't think they are. I mean, Lars Nootbaar being traded away all of a sudden opens up another spot, and then center field is fair game for Victor Scott or Nathan Church. But it certainly does make things a little bit more interesting with Joshua Báez. It feels like not being very far away.
Lots to unpack there. I like that Lynn Worthy kind of pumped the brakes on it a little bit, saying, the grass isn't always necessarily greener on the other side. Everybody always sees a prospect doing well, and why don't we call him up now? Why don't we go right away? But as you mentioned, Báez, a lot of his traditional numbers are eye-popping, but as you mentioned, some of those other statistics he needs to work on, especially the contact rate in the zone, as you shared the Bernie Miklasz stat. It was, for reference, as you said, 73.6% for reference. Major league average, I believe, is between 85 and 87% of your contact rate in the strike zone. So if you're already struggling with that at AAA, pitchers are going to know how to attack you and be able to utilize that against you. And that's what we've seen with guys like Jordan Walker in years previous, of knowing weakness, being able to exploit it. So I say that because, it doesn't necessarily mean Josh Báez is ready to come up right now. I think we probably will see him at some point in 2026. If I had to guess, it would definitely be post All-Star break. We would, like you said, it'd have to depend on how the trade deadline turns out. But I mean, it's interesting how cyclical things can be. You think back to when Victor Scott first came up, it wasn't to the same extent of runway that he has that Michael Ciani had, but Michael Ciani had kind of the same play style where he was above average speed, Gold Glove caliber defense, and then Victor Scott kind of knocked down the door, and then now you have Josh Báez coming through with a completely different play style, kind of potentially bumping him out of his spot. So I think there's a lot to pay attention to. There's still a world where even if Victor Scott is not an everyday center fielder, depending on Nathan Church's performance, as you mentioned, depending on Lars Nootbaar's presence or absence post-deadline, you could see a world maybe where you have a guy like Victor Scott to be a pinch runner or maybe a specialist for sacrifices, but obviously that wouldn't be the ideal result for him. And it's different with a guy who's struggling like Victor Scott compared to Jordan Walker. Jordan Walker has, a lot more upside. He's a first-round pick compared to the fifth-round pick of Victor Scott. And, I mean, you even see a guy like Nolan Gorman, who was a top prospect in the organization at one point. His runway is getting pretty short too, but that's a conversation for another day. A lot to pay attention to, a lot to, keep your eyes on, especially Joshua Báez at Memphis as he continues to rake. But I'm looking forward to this next month or so of Cardinals baseball as we head into the All-Star break.
A conversation eventually to happen will be, what does this rotation look like once it goes back to 5 from the 6 that it is currently at? Does Hunter Dobbins get sent back down to Triple-A or head back to the bullpen to be a long reliever like he has been? Or do we see Oliver Marmol and this coaching staff mix things up? That is a conversation for another week. Be sure to like and follow STL Sports Central on all of their pages, and like and follow us as well on Instagram, X, Facebook at Lou Sports Talk _. He is Dylan Hampel. I am Ethan Hannaford. Episode number 115. That's a wrap.